At the end of 1993, gaming changed forever with the release of Doom. Id Software had released a phenomenon and gamers were quick to latch onto it. Doom quickly became a staple of university dorms and office workspaces around the world, but one frontier that Doom hadn't touched down on was the home console front. As a bleeding-edge game, demanding high specifications, the idea of bringing Doom to the home console space seemed laughable, yet many console manufacturers and video game publishers wanted to make it happen. The first home console version would be developed in-house by id Software themselves, John Carmack personally overseeing the development of the engine and modifications to ensure the version ran as best as it could. This version, referred to as Jaguar Doom, would eventually become the basis for multiple versions of console Doom to be released over the coming years. But that version wasn't the first official console release. That honour actually fell to a Sega-developed port. With the help of John Carmack and his modified code, as well as an insanely crunched development cycle, Sega were able to get Doom released alongside the brand new 32X on the 21st of November 1994. But what is the 32X console? How did it come to be? How involved were id Software in the development of Doom for the console? And was it actually any good? This is Doom on the 32X. The Sega Genesis, Mega Drive in the EU, was released in 1988. It was the first major console to herald in the 16-bit era of consoles and was a successor to the Master System. The console would end up going head-to-head with Super Nintendo for a good few years, the two platforms competing strongly through the late 1980s and early 1990s, giving rise to a number of iconic titles and franchises. The 3DO and Atari Jaguar were the first consoles to arrive, promising to deliver 3D gaming experiences and a leap beyond 16 bits. The Genesis simply couldn't compete with these newer consoles directly, and the fear within Sega was that they wouldn't have a console ready to compete against these new machines until the end of 1995. With executives in Japan fretting, they pressured Sega of America president Joe Miller to come up with a solution that would keep the Genesis competitive until that successor was ready. Several ideas were batted around, including a Genesis 2 console, but Miller felt the same benefits could be achieved by releasing an add-on that would increase the Genesis's core power. The only issue is that Sega had already tried to launch such a peripheral previously, the Sega CD, and it proved to be a sales disappointment. Undeterred, Miller put his team at Sega of America to work on developing the 32X with an eye on releasing it in time for the 1994 holiday season. Its intention was to expand the power of the Genesis and transform it into a 32-bit console, allowing people who own Genesis consoles the option of an upgrade without the outlay of a new console. The 32X was set to be priced at $159.99 in the US, half of what the Dreamcast would eventually retail for in that country. The 32X was unveiled at the Summer Consumer Electronics Show in June 1994. The marketing around the device focused on it being a cheap way to get into the next generation. Unfortunately, knowledge of the Sega Saturn made the 32X a very awkward proposition to many, with 3DO taking jabs at the messiness of the proposition, while Sega themselves couldn't answer if games for the 32X would be compatible with the rumoured Saturn console. Things only got worse for the 32X when Sega of Japan unveiled the Saturn would release in November 1994. The same month, the 32X would touch down in the USA. The next generation console would be overshadowing the add-on that was intended to keep the Genesis relevant. This surprise caught Sega of America off guard, who were left scrambling to make their 32X relevant. Sega of America promised there would be 12 games available at launch, Doom included, but the real number ended up only being 6. The 32X enjoyed strong initial interest and actually exceeded Sega's projections for the 1994 holiday period, but soon after that things began to fall apart quickly. The Saturn sold well in Japan and was very competitive against Sony's PlayStation. Sega of Japan dictated the 32X was irrelevant and demanded all focus be shifted to Saturn. The 32X wasn't officially retired until 1996, but the writing was on the wall long before that. In particular, when the US retail price tumbled from $99 in the back half of 1995 to $19 as the console was being kicked out of stores. In total, 40 games would be developed for the 32X, with many critics panning the add-on for its poor game selection and Sega abandoning it. People who bought the add-on really weren't given that much to celebrate. Doom's release in late 1993 was a huge moment for video games. Its release on PC heralded in the dawn of a new age for 3D games, and console manufacturers were eager to get it on their platforms. The Sega Genesis was deemed not powerful enough for Doom, and so the 32X add-on made more sense as a home for the port. With the 32X entering development in early 1994, Sega acquired the rights to publishing Doom on Sega platforms, and oversaw development of the port in-house. The intention was to have Doom be among the launch titles, showcasing the power that 32X could bring to the Genesis. The problem was that Doom had to be moulded and reshaped to fit into the 32X limits. That required John Carmack to work on the port directly. Having already begun development of a port for Doom on Atari Jaguar, Carmack made use of that modified code to help bring down development time. Features had to be stripped out to meet the tight deadline. Monster infighting, multi-facing sprites, many other features were left on the cutting room floor. The game simply didn't run in a stable enough way when using full screen mode, so the game was forced to run in a reduced vision mode. Carmack was also forced to remove the entire Inferno episode from the 32X version of Doom. There simply wasn't enough time to implement it properly. This had the unfortunate side effect of making Doom on 32X the shortest overall Doom campaign in the classic Doom outings. Carmack camped out for several weeks at Sega of America's headquarters, crunching to get the game released. Scott Bayless, senior producer at Sega of America, said about Carmack's work on the 32X version, "I spent weeks working with id Software's John Carmack, who literally camped out at the Sega of America building in Redwood City trying to get the Doom game ported. That guy worked his ass off, and he still had to cut a third of the levels to get it done in time. What amazes me now is that with all that going on, nobody at Sega was willing to say, 'Wait a minute, what are we doing? Why don't we just stop?' Sega should have killed the 32X in the spring of 1994, but we didn't. We stormed the hill, and when we got to the top, we realised it was the wrong damn hill." Carmack in the years since has commented on the 32X as a target system positively, stating in a 2018 post on X, "I rather like the 32X as a target. 2 decent cores and a frame buffer." Leaked prototypes of the 32X version of Doom from September 1994 showcased the game was a lot more ambitious then. A full screen view, less modified levels, and higher texture quality were obvious across the board. It's clear that the performance inconsistencies from these could not be ironed out before the release of 32X. Doom simply could not miss that window. That explains why a lot of these improvements were scrapped and we got the version that we did. In the end, the 32X version of Doom would release on November 21st, 1994 as part of the launch lineup for the 32X. It would also be the first official console port of Doom released to the public, beating out the Atari Jaguar version by a week. So I guess it's time to talk about 32X Doom itself, and I'm going to be honest, it's a bit of a mess. The issues facing this version of Doom come from the fact that so much had to be scrapped and removed in order to get the game running on 32X in the first place. This version doesn't feature monster infighting, it doesn't have enemy sprites which turn depending on where the player is looking at the enemy. It lacks the entire Inferno episode, effectively cutting the game down by 1/3. It also features the same cuts and tweaks made to the Jaguar level set, meaning a lot of the levels have been simplified or made smaller. That means a lot less Doom for your buck on the Sega 32X. It also doesn't feature a number of iconic enemies. The Cyber Demon, Spider Mastermind, and Spectre are all left out of the roster of enemies you'll be facing off against. I guess the big question after that laundry list of removed features is the game playable? Yeah, I would actually say it is fairly playable. Performance doesn't quite match up with the Jaguar version, which runs slightly better and more consistently in its full screen mode, but the 32X version definitely is more playable than other console ports. Ironically, it's more playable in my opinion than the Saturn version of Doom. For players in 1994, I doubt any of that will really have mattered. Seeing Doom run on a home console in a playable state and delivering what was basically the Doom experience in its entirety less than a year after it touched down on PC was pretty amazing. Movement isn't that bad, the D-pad controls are responsive and the button layout is easy to get to grips with. This makes the general gameplay a lot more intuitive. The problem is if you're used to PC Doom, coming into this version has a very weird vibe to it. Enemies shuffle and move in a notably different way. This is because of that sprite issue we talked about earlier. It doesn't ruin gameplay, but it does stand out. At its core, it's still Doom though. The weapons are all here, although the BFG you have to cheat to get your hands on it, and the encounters are still fun to play through. you'll still be blasting through the bases and having a good time regardless of limitations. The fact is though, there are only 17 levels in this one, and that makes it comfortably the shortest of the official Doom console campaigns on any console. Cutting out Inferno probably saved a lot of development time, but it also robs this version of Doom of a lot of interesting visuals, which I'd argue it solely needs. Most of the levels in this one are either grey or brown, and it has some of the most mundane feel to playing through it. A lot of the spaces don't pop like they do in the PC version, and even next to other console ports, this version's visuals feel a bit like a downgrade. The textures are very grainy and duller from a distance, which lends this version a very washed out and dull appearance. The window on screen reducing screen size is also a bit disappointing, but this was an essential compromise to get the game running on the console. It should also be noted there isn't a save system with this one. You're allowed to pick which level you want to dive into from the main menu, but if you want to access the final level, Fortress of Mystery from the PC version, you have to complete all the levels in one sitting. This version also has some of the worst music. The game fails to make use of the 32X's enhanced sound hardware, relying instead on inferior sound capabilities from the Genesis itself, and it makes the soundtrack easily amongst the worst in the entire Doom franchise. Now to be clear, I'm not blaming the 32X hardware here. I'm actually not even blaming the Genesis hardware, I'm blaming the poor conversion job that was done in this process. I'll let you listen for yourselves here. It has led to this version of Doom gaining notoriety and has been described by some online as cats farting. That being said, the Jaguar version released with no soundtrack in each of the levels at all, so it's down to you whether you feel a bad soundtrack or no soundtrack is the better way to go here. It's clear that Sega wanted that Doom magic to rub off on the 32X. I think the fact that this version was critically well received when it touched down showcases that simply having this game exist on the platform got people in the door. And ultimately that's all it was ever intended to do. It was featured heavily in marketing material and even got TV spots that entirely focused on it. Time has not been kind though to this version of Doom, and while it's looked back on fondly by those who entered the franchise through it, the general consensus puts it in the lower tier of console Doom ports. People critique the music, the appearance and overall experience. Had this port been given more time in the oven, it's likely that more could have been achieved. Sega were desperate for big names to land on the 32X, and there were fewer bigger names in the gaming space than Doom in 1994. Doom is a casualty of that rush. The 32X was floating in the water once the Saturn gained momentum, and Doom was arguably one of the best games to actually touch down on it. Other first-person shooters were planned for release. The likes of Alien Trilogy were penciled in for future 32X versions. After it became obvious the 32X version was not longed for this world, developers stepped back. Fans though haven't forgotten the 32X version of Doom, and in recent years, a project called 32X Resurrection has sought to bring this version to its full potential. Overall, the 32X version of Doom is a curiosity but nothing more in the modern age. This game was willed into existence by Sega, rightly or wrongly, showcasing the hype around Doom in 1994. Everyone wanted Doom on their consoles, even if it didn't quite fit in the door. The truth is, this is one of the more compromised versions of console Doom, and while it does play well, its performance issues and limited level set make it hard to suggest going back to experience this one if you haven't done so already. I would personally try out the Resurrection project, as I feel that's a better reflection of what 32X could have achieved with more time. As it stands though, I don't hate 32X Doom, I just don't think it's particularly great either. There are better console ports that I'll be talking about in the future, but technically this was the first one out the door, and thus it has the distinction of setting the bar.